Hi guys, today I am back for part 2 of my Spider-Man review series, and today the movie we're going to be reviewing is Spider-Man 2, the second entry in the beloved Raimi trilogy. Before we get into the review, let's just look at how this movie did at the box office. On its opening day, Spider-Man 2 made $40.4 million, meaning that it beat its predecessor Spider-Man by exactly $1 million. Overall, Spider-Man 2 made almost $800 million at the box office worldwide, and is held by many fans as the best Spider-Man film to date. So let's get into the best things about Spider-Man 2.
Pizza time.
For starters, I decided to call this video the best things about Spider-Man 2 because I rewatched this movie and was just absolutely wowed. Upon rewatching this movie, I was looking for good things and bad things. I just couldn't find anything bad about it. I just absolutely love this movie, so everything you hear in this review is going to be completely positive from me. So to start us off, this is something that I completely forgot to mention in my Spider-Man 2002 review, but still applies here, and that is Danny Elfman's score. In my opinion, Danny Elfman's score is the best score we've ever had in a theatrical Spider-Man movie. To me, it just captures Spider-Man perfectly. The main title theme from these movies is probably known by any Spider-Man fan and is most likely the most iconic by far. This score also does an amazing job of sounding super intense during fight scenes and can also sound really sinister in scenes involving Harry. This can create a very tense feeling in the audience, and I love it. Another thing I love about this movie is that straight from the beginning it shows us how much Spider-Man has been integrated into the city of New York. In the first few minutes of the movie, when Spider-Man is delivering pizzas, he goes out of his way to save two children that have run into the middle of the road whilst chasing a ball. When Spidey swoops in to save them at the last minute, you can hear civilians shouting encouraging things such as "Way to go, Spidey!" You know, they're all being like super supportive of him and they love him. My favourite time that we see this strong bond between Spider-Man and the city of New York is when he takes off his mask to save all the civilians on the train since he could no longer see. When he passes out, not only do the civilians carry him to a gentle rest, but they also promise to keep his identity a secret. This is a huge deal for Peter, and you can see the gratification in his face when they do this for him. This is also the complete opposite of what Goblin said would happen in Spider-Man 1. Goblin said, that eventually, after all you've done for them, they will hate you. But over time, they've just grown to love him even more. I also love the inclusion of this bond with the city of New York, because when Peter isn't being Spider-Man, it's like no one cares about him at all. No one notices him because he's not Spider-Man. But it shows that Peter is trying to live these two completely different lives, and they don't go together very well at all, but he's trying to balance them both. I also love how well this movie displays the consequences of being Spider-Man on Peter's life. Just to list a few, Spider-Man stops Peter from delivering pizzas, which ultimately gets him fired. He is late to MJ's play and therefore cannot see it. Harry is turning sour at him for taking pictures of Spider-Man because he thinks that Spider-Man killed his father, when in fact he is Spider-Man, so that guilts him even more. And there are so many more that, you know, Spider-Man is really just ruining Peter's life in this movie. These consequences of being Spider-Man is what makes Peter's story so emotional during this movie. He will always be burdened with responsibility and will never be able to get his own way. For example, once Peter loses his powers and is no longer Spider-Man, he can finally be with MJ. However, he's already too late. She already has another man. Then later in the movie, there's a burning building where Peter runs in and saves a little girl. And then after that, he overhears two firemen saying that there was another man trapped in the building who didn't manage to get out. And this leaves him with a huge amount of guilt, because if he was Spider-Man, he could have saved both of them and it would have been fine, no one would have died. So this shows that whether Peter is Spider-Man or whether he's just Peter Parker, he can never get what he truly desires. I also think Mr. Ditkovich is a brilliant addition to the list of characters in this Spider-Man universe. He sort of acts like a Jameson type character to Peter, who is like constantly sort of picking on him and bullying him, and Peter is always trying to dodge him since he hasn't paid his rent. I think his name is also a reference to Steve Ditko, who is the first person to ever draw Spider-Man for the first appearance in Amazing Fantasy 15. Although I don't think that Mr. Ditkovich is a massively important character in the grand scheme of the plot, I think he's still important because he acts as another obstacle that Peter has to overcome. Scenes with Mr. Ditkovich can be really funny, but can also be really difficult to watch because he gives Peter a really hard time. Going as far to take the only money Peter had for rent, and that money was actually his birthday money given to him by his poor aunt. This movie shows how unhealthy Peter's life has become since he has started prioritising Spider-Man over his own personal life, and Peter is really struggling with this throughout the movie. The main villain of this movie is Dr. Octopus, or more commonly referred to as Doc Ock.
Doc Ock.
I think Otto Octavius's arc is handled perfectly in this movie for both people who are fans of Spider-Man comics and for people who have never heard of these characters before. For people who have never heard of these characters before, his turn to being a villain is a complete shock because he's introduced to the audience as a brilliant scientist who wants to better mankind by using his new breakthrough technology in fusion to create a new sustainable energy source. It is good that he is introduced this way to people who have never heard of these characters before, because people who have never heard of them may not suspect his tragic fate. However, for fans of Spider-Man, his origin is still handled extremely well. This is because even if you highly expect him to become the villain of the movie does a great job of making you want the opposite. Otto isn't a bad person. This means that as soon as we meet the character of Otto, we already start to like him and we want the best for him. So this means that when we get to the part where his wife Rosie is tragically killed by the very thing that he created and gets driven insane by his mechanical arms, we feel empathetic towards him because this is not what we wanted. This is what I mean by Otto isn't a bad person. He didn't mean for any of this to happen, and even though it did happen by accident, his further crimes are because he's being controlled by his mechanical arms. This is why I love the final battle of this movie in particular, because even though Doc Ock and Spider-Man throw down in some epic fight scenes, like the train scene, which is like amazing, it ultimately ends with Peter talking to Otto about what he's done and convincing him that what he's done is wrong and he needs to change his ways before it's too late. Peter also mentions to Otto a message that Otto taught him himself. He said to Peter that intelligence is a privilege and should be used for the greater good or for the good of mankind, and this is not what Doc Ock is doing right now. He's following his dream. He'll do anything he can to get this dream, and in the meantime he's destroying the city. This is where he also mentions some things that Aunt May told him previous to this fight, but I'll get to that later. This ultimately sparks a change of heart in Otto, and he sacrifices his life for the city of New York in order to redeem himself for his wrongdoings. I love this section of the final battle because it shows that not all problems are solved with violence, and some things need to be talked down before they can be solved. Just before we go to MJ's play, we see Peter's wardrobe. I love this scene because there are only two items in Peter's wardrobe: Peter's Spider-Man suit and a formal suit. To me, I get the sense that this is a little visual indication that Peter has no downtime and no time to relax. He's either being Spider-Man or he's attending something that requires him to be a certain person. He's required to be smart and professional, such as the part where I can't remember what it's called, but it's like a celebration for John Jameson and he is taking photos there, therefore he's wearing that suit. Although we do see Peter in more dressed down clothes than other parts of the film, he is still always busy in these scenes and he never seems to have any downtime or time to relax. He's always occupied. Just after MJ's play, Spider-Man is needed once again, and as he is on his swing to the rescue, his powers begin to fail. I really love how Sam Raimi handled the loss of Peter's powers in this movie. Whenever Peter is feeling upset or emotionally distressed, he seems to start losing his powers. For example, after we see John kiss MJ after her play, he goes to help the cops like I just mentioned, and his powers fail. Then it happens again at the planetarium when John announces that MJ has agreed to marry him. He goes on a swing to clear his mind and his powers start to fail once again. Later on, this is explored even more, and eventually it boils down to a choice that Peter has to make, whether he wants to be Spider-Man or not. Ultimately, he doesn't want to be Spider-Man anymore. He wants to be a normal person and live a life with the girl of his dreams. At this point, he's been beaten down too many times. He can't continue his fight anymore. He's just Peter Parker. Spider-Man no more. The hospital scene with Doc Ock. Now, I think this scene is one of the best in the whole movie because Sam Raimi wasn't afraid to explore a different tone to the rest of the movie. This scene looks like something out of a horror movie, which is very Sam Raimi because before Spider-Man, Sam Raimi actually worked on a horror project, and that's actually what got him famous in the first place. I also love this scene because he causes a lot more destruction here than he does when he's conscious, as if the arms are more powerful when he is unconscious because Doc Ock can't hold back at all. Even though Otto isn't in control anyway, it's almost like he has no control here. Whereas when he's conscious, he at least has some sort of control over the arms. So I really like this scene because it shows that if he gives in to these monsters, he can be a really dangerous person. The whole scene in the planetarium in celebration of JJ's son John is also an amazing scene. This scene is ultimately the combination of everything bad in Peter's life coming together to tip him over the edge and ultimately make him quit being Spider-Man. Harry gets really drunk and verbally and physically abuses Peter. He slaps him twice and he shouts at him. He says, he goes on about how he cares more about Spider-Man than he does about him because he's his bread and butter. Basically, Peter tries to protect Spider-Man's identity because he's his source of income. Without taking pictures of Spider-Man, Peter gets no money. This scene is very emotional because Peter can't do anything back. He doesn't want to hurt his best friend, so he just allows his friend to slap him and shout at him. And it's almost like a man with this much power, Spider-Man, is completely powerless against his best friend. He can't do anything. He doesn't want to do anything. He's scared. He's speechless. He doesn't know what to do. Straight after this scene, Peter is in complete shock, and then John announces that MJ has agreed to marry him, which just destroys Peter inside. You can see the look in his face. He's absolutely mortified. He's destroyed. He has nothing left. His best friend hates him, and the girl he loves is taken by another man. Aunt May's speech. Now, I love this piece of dialogue. It's really well thought out and it carries a really meaningful message. It also sets up some amazing things that could have been explored in Spider-Man 3 if it had been done correctly, but obviously we know it wasn't, so I'll get into those now. Aunt May talks about how sometimes people must give up their dreams in order to do the right thing, which is what Peter uses in the final battle to convince Doc Ock to turn around, change his ways and save the world. Also, when Aunt May is talking about giving up dreams and responsibility and all these things, it kind of hints to me that Aunt may know that Peter is Spider-Man, because these things that she's talking about are weirdly specific to Peter and how he's dealing with being Spider-Man. Like, really specific. This is the thing that I definitely would have liked to see in Spider-Man 3, but sadly it wasn't explored and we got the Spider-Man 3 that we all know about today. Finally, I think the ending of this movie is wrapped up perfectly. MJ finding out that Peter is Spider-Man was the perfect way to go about this. It's what the movie is leading up to the whole time, and because of this, all the emotions felt by these two characters in this small scene is just, they all feel so completely earned. Like, these characters earned the right to feel these feelings. It's not just thrown in. It feels so natural. It's a beautiful scene. Peter no longer has to make up crappy excuses as to why he can't be there for her, and she no longer has to feel let down or abandoned by Peter. She understands now why he was never there for her. He was putting his life on the line every day being Spider-Man, whilst also trying to be there for her as much as he could. He just couldn't do it and it was breaking him inside, and she realizes this now. It's not even all said. It's not like a spoken thing. You can just see it in their face. Like, they're so happy. She's like, shit, I've been treating this guy like crap for the whole movie, and he's like, oh my god, she finally understands. And it's a beautiful scene. Peter then goes to try and explain to MJ that this is why they could never be together. Spider-Man will always have enemies and it's not safe for her. However, she tells him straight. She's like, bro, I love you, yeah? You're Spider-Man, yeah? I'm gonna love who I wanna love, and I love you. She loves Peter Parker. I think this movie is absolutely breathtaking. Insert Keanu Reeves clip here.
You're breathtaking!
This film is much more of a character drama than the first one, but in my opinion, this is completely fine. This movie did everything that the first film did, but a million times better, including much bigger action sequences and diving further into the stories of all these characters involved. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it this far, again, thank you. Please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell, that way you know whenever we upload. We upload very frequently on every Wednesday and Saturday. Thank you so much for the continued support from our subscribers. We all appreciate it so much. I hope you're all staying safe, staying healthy, staying well, and I shall see you guys next time. Goodbye. Welsh people.